This episode is brought to you by Bowtech.
As you listen to this, I will be somewhere in Utah hunting mule deer with my bow. For weeks and months before this, I tinkered with my compound bow setup, arrows, and broadheads, and at times, I had to stop myself from slipping down the rabbit hole of bow hunting gear to remind myself what really matters and what doesn't. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and to help make this point more clearly, I'm talking to Executive Gear Editor Scott Einsmann in today's podcast. Scott is a former archery coach. He's worked in archery shops. He shot competitively in college. And for the last several years, he's been testing and reviewing all the major bow hunting gear on the market. If there's anyone who can help clarify what aspects of bow hunting archery you need to focus on in these weeks before the season, it's him. All right, Scott, as we're talking here, we're just a few weeks away from a bunch of archery seasons. In fact, right after we record this podcast, I'm going to drive to Utah for the early archery mule deer hunting season. And if bow hunters listening to this are anything like myself, they have been scrambling around, messing with different arrow setups, fine-tuning their sight pins, doing all sorts of stuff to their bows and to their setups and obsessing over all these little things. And I think it can be a little easy to get distracted by all of these fine points and sometimes maybe forget about what's most important when it comes to actually making a good shot on an elk or a mule deer or a whitetail in a hunting scenario. So that's why I want to talk to you, our resident archery coach, an archery nerd, my personal bow hunting coach. So yeah, let's just start there. What are the things when it comes to bow hunting, and we're talking about the archery aspect of bow hunting, making a good shot in the field? What actually matters?
Well, first of all, I am definitely one of those people who is scrambling right now, putting together a setup that I think is going to work and obsessing over the fine details. So I'm right there with everybody.
Good. Glad to hear it.
But yeah, it is good to recenter and think about what actually matters in all of this. So let's start with the most important thing, which is you, the archer, the person who is the X factor in all of this. And so if you suck, it doesn't matter what bow you have, what arrows, nothing's going to help.
Right.
So step one is making sure your bow fits you properly. Your draw length isn't too long. It's not too short. Your peep height is comfortable, and you have the semblance of basic archery form.
Okay. Give me a quick little hint here. What's a good indicator that my bow does not fit me properly? What can I look for?
So there are some visual cues for sure. If the string is pulled way past, your nose and the corner of your mouth, and you're leaning back as you're drawing the bow, and just feel overextended, that's a good indicator. If your sight picture looks really jittery, or if you have to bend your bow arm to, comfortably anchor, your draw length is too short. And there's more to it than that. We could talk about alignment. Hard to do without visuals, but YouTube it, look up alignment, and go from there. Because that's really, if you can get into proper alignment, a lot of archery problems just kind of
gotcha.
Like you're going to hold really steady. You're going to be able to hold that full draw forever because you're not relying on muscles anymore. Your skeletal structure is supporting the weight of the bow. And even when you're in proper alignment, your bad shots aren't so bad because there's less chance of muscles inducing any kind of like herky-jerky movements when you release the arrow.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
So alignment.
Yep.
Let's say we're a month out from, just for the sake of argument, let's say we're a month out from opening day of when the folks listening to this will start their bow hunting season. Most of their like, to be fair, most of their form, most of their shooting ability is already kind of set, right? Like in a month's worth of time, it's not like they're going to suddenly be able to become some elite archer if they, if they haven't already been shooting and working on all this stuff. But what could someone do with this month of time to just kind of be the best archery shot that they can be?
Yeah. Well, you can get a month is not a lot of time, but you can get some good practice in as long as you're shooting a lot of arrows. Like I've gone from not shooting for like a couple months and then a month out before a tournament, shot like a crazy amount of arrows and then, shot good enough to finish top 10 at nationals. So it's possible.
Classic Scott procrastination, just cramming for the test. Okay, well, that's good to hear. If you can do it, others can too.
You can cram, archery coaches are hard to find, but YouTube is helpful. It can also be kind of dangerous. So choose your YouTubers wisely. But other things you can do is really just get comfortable shooting in like hunting scenarios. Whether if you're a Western hunter shooting uphill, downhill type shots, practicing those steep angles, practicing shooting in wind. If you're a whitetail hunter like us, shooting out of your tree stand or tree saddle, whatever, or ground blind, whatever you're hunting from, getting comfortable in all that, making sure that whatever clothing you're going to be wearing isn't getting in the way of the bowstring. That kind of stuff is extremely helpful right before the season. Also doing things like holding for a long time at full draw and then executing a good shot. I think we've all been there before, just come to full draw when, a deer's head is behind a tree or something, and then they just stop and their vitals are covered. And you're at full draw for a minute plus waiting for them to finally take another step. And you don't want to feel like you're rushing that shot. You still need to be accurate, right? So practicing that and having that experience really helps. Like I just wrote that article about practicing shooting under pressure.
Yeah.
And the benefits of that. There's nothing like shooting at a live animal, but having some experience of shooting while you're nervous and a little bit tense, it's extremely valuable. So whether that's a local 3D tournament, shooting with your buddies, making things so that your heart rate is increased, you're nervous about the shot, and it's like a shot that you need to make, just like when you're hunting. That's also really beneficial.
Yeah, one thing you were talking about holding at full draw, I think one thing that I've kind of messed up in the past during, just summer shooting sessions is I kind of, you have a shot process that you go through. And when you shoot enough, that shot process has a pretty consistent time. If I'm just standing comfortably in my backyard, I'm shooting at 40 yards, the time from the point where I draw the bow to release the arrow is pretty consistent on every shot because I'm just going through the same process. I'm not really thinking. This is just naturally how long it takes for me to draw the bow, get on target, and break a clean shot. A lot of times you don't have that luxury in a hunting scenario. You have to shoot when the animal is in the right position. So you might have to speed up your shot process a little bit or really wait for a long time at full draw. And if you haven't been practicing that at all, that can be kind of jarring because now you're breaking this, this training that you've done basically all summer of just, all right, draw, float the pin, squeeze, and just just kind of choosing your own timing. That's a lot different. So yeah. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. And it kind of extends into everything, ranging the deer, knowing which pin to use, having like a plan of, okay, so the deer's quartered away, I need to aim here, like making all those like little decisions that lead up to the shot, practicing those and having like a general plan of attack is, that's also helpful, especially if you're new. Like if you haven't done this a ton, that's a big deal. Or if you're using like a 5-pin type sight where it's easy to get lost with how many pins you have. What else? Also like the mental side of archery, having some type of mental game plan in place. So biggest mistake I think, hunters make is they get to full draw and they kind of black out. And next thing they know, the arrow's gone, the deer runs away. What just happened?
Yeah.
To avoid that, you need some type of plan in place for those scenarios where you're staying in the present moment, only focusing on the things that you can control, not worrying about what type of mount you're going to get or anything like that. You need to focus on, all right, I'm hooking my release. All right, my grip is set, coming to full draw, anchor. Okay, I'm going to use my 30-yard pin and place it, just behind the shoulder. Squeeze my trigger, squeeze, boom, the shot breaks. Walking yourself through those steps, you don't have to, for some people, they need every single step. They need to say it in their head to keep themselves in that present moment. Other people, they just need like one verbal cue that they say in their head.
Yeah.
So having that type of plan, again, that kind of goes back to practicing under pressure. You'll kind of learn that as the more you shoot under pressure, you'll learn like what your preferences are there.
Okay. That's all the boring stuff, Coach Scott. Form, alignment, okay, we get it. Yeah. You have to practice. All of us know this. Now take us into the fun stuff. What sort of gear can we buy that will make us better archers? What matters? Give me a shortcut to being a better bow hunter.
Okay, so a good broadhead definitely will make a difference.
Yeah.
Don't buy the Amazon brand broadheads to go hunting with, please.
Yeah.
Please.
And you've done a ton of testing around broadheads, so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I've tested like 40 plus broadheads for accuracy, durability, sharpness, like all the things. But they're all like name brand broadheads. Only a handful didn't make it through my durability test, which was a pretty light durability test as far as broadhead test goes. It wasn't anything like sensational. It was just like shooting through PVC pipe, which is round and brittle, a lot like a bone. So
sure.
few of them did not survive that. And if your broadhead is mangled, it's not going to penetrate, it's not going to cut. So obviously a bad thing. And that's what you run into with cheap broadheads. A good broadhead, a good sharp broadhead, that's a good upgrade. You don't have to buy an iron will, but like just something in the middle, like, Magnus Stinger is a great budget broadhead. All right. Other cool like archery stuff you can buy. Another thing I'm doing right now is I'm testing like a budget release aid versus, so it costs like $50. It's like a good budget release aid versus like a $200 release aid. Both of them are index, wrist strap style releases.
Sure.
There are benefits, especially if you're punching the trigger, which happens, in the woods. That lighter, crisper trigger is going to be more forgiving if you punch it. So like if you look at like a Kyle Douglas, who's a professional archer who is notorious for punching the trigger. He's won Vegas doing it, so I'm not here to judge him for his archery technique, but he has a super light trigger. And I think that's a key. If you're going to punch, a light trigger, it really helps. If you're not going to punch, though, heavier trigger is nice. Keep you from punching.
Sure.
So there's a trade-off there. That's worthwhile. I don't think, if you're a whitetail hunter, a sight is probably the last thing I would ever upgrade.
Yeah.
Like sights are cool, like especially if you want to shoot long distances. It's nice to have a really, really good sight. Like I just got the UltraView slider sight. It's awesome, but it's just not necessary for shooting whitetails inside of 35 yards. But so like for most people, a fixed pin 3-pin sight is perfect. Arrow rest though, quiet, reliable arrow rest is 100% worth the money. So if Whisker Biscuit is good. Again, like it'll work, but some of the cheaper dropaways are definitely worth upgrading. Anything in your archery system that is noisy, that's worth upgrading.
Yeah. Do you have kind of like a mid-priced or affordable drop-away rest that you would recommend?
So the Q80s, all of them are excellent. So they have like a budget model that doesn't have, I say budget, but like it's still pretty expensive. It doesn't have, any micro adjust or anything, which isn't necessary unless you're like messing with your rest all the time. And then like on the upper end, using a Hamskea Epsilon, super quiet limb driven rest. I really like it.
How about arrows? And this is kind of a two-part question here. A ton of people get caught up in arrow weight. How much does arrow weight matter? And then the second part is, how much does the quality of arrow matter? And again, we're talking about bow hunting scenarios here. Do you get a real advantage from going with the highest priced arrows?
So again, I am shooting probably one of the most expensive arrows available, the new Ultra View 1Ks, because I am a crazy person and I love archery and I want to try all the latest and the greatest when it comes to this sport of archery. And I'm also super busy, so it was great that they came pre-fledged and I didn't have to do anything.
Right.
But no, you don't need them to kill anything on planet Earth. But they are very cool, and they are really accurate, and they are really quiet, and they are durable. So yeah, like for most people, an Easton Axis, like 5mm Easton Axis, is the perfect hunting arrow because you get a slightly smaller diameter than standard. But the key with the Axis arrows and what makes them so good is the hit insert system. So it's like the hidden insert system. What that does is it is like a foolproof way of making sure that your broadhead is going to be aligned, because the interior diameter of an arrow is more consistent than the exterior diameter. So like that's the issue with a lot of outserts, and why a lot of companies have moved to like an insert outsert system, so that they have like a little bit more of that guaranteed alignment from the insert system. So anyway, enough of like the archery nerd diversion. That's a great arrow. They're still pretty expensive. Yeah. But like that is like, if you want like a good arrow without going crazy, that's awesome. Can you use something cheaper and be successful? Absolutely. You're going to give up, some durability, some consistency. So it just depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Again, if you're shooting whitetails inside of 30 yards, nothing matters really. It's super easy to be accurate inside of that distance. You're going to be the biggest factor in the system, as long as like the basics of equipment, like your broadhead is aligned, you're shooting arrows of the same spine, they're all cut to the same length. Like working in archery shops for a long time, I've seen some crazy stuff. That's what I'm saying. Some of these things, your bow is tuned, like just like the basics are in place. You're going to be fine with, some budget gear.
Okay. Talk to us about arrow weight, because people love to get into this.
So you just have to understand the trade-offs of arrow weight. So yeah, going above 500 grains in arrow weight, you're going to gain some advantages in terms of ability to penetrate through bigger animals, thicker bones, all that kind of stuff. And you'll be able to take maybe some more marginal quartering shots and still like be able to penetrate fully, get a pass through. But there's like some disadvantages to going to the extremes of a heavy arrow setup, where now your trajectory becomes extremely unforgiving. And, your arrow's dropping 10 inches between 35 and 40 yards. You better know the exact distance. And, if an animal takes a step, especially if it's like an elk, one small step for an elk is, a couple of yards. So yeah, it just becomes a very unforgiving setup at distance. Again, if you're shooting close, like we're friends with the THP crew. They're super into the heavy arrows, but they shoot deer close.
Yeah.
So that's fine. Like inside of 30 yards is a really forgiving distance for trajectory equipment. So that's not really a problem, especially if you're shooting like 70 plus pounds in draw weight. And then on the light side, speed is great, super flat trajectory. So it's very forgiving of like small differences in yardage, but you're going to give up some of that penetration ability. Your bow is going to be louder. And then if you get too fast, you're going to have a hard time getting broadheads to fly, especially a fixed blade broadhead above 300 feet per second. Around that, they become really hard to tune. So disadvantages to going super light, and like a super light arrow is like below 400 grains. In the middle there, and that like 450 grain sweet spot is where I think most people will be happy. And for most like adult men, a 450 grain arrow is extremely easy to build. Just about, most like normal, hunting arrows, with, you won't have to mess around too much is what I'm saying to get to that weight.
It's all kind of standard spines, standard arrow lengths. Yeah,
exactly. And for most people, that will give them like a 260 to 275 feet per second arrow speed, which is great. So yeah, it'd be easy to tune, good penetration, be able to kill most things in the world with a 450 grain arrow and a modern compound bow with like a 60 plus pound draw weight. For people who find themselves like on the lighter end of draw weight or the shorter end of the draw length curve, that's when like going like more on the light side or on the heavy side, depending what they're hunting. That's when, you're going to have to like do some archery math and kind of weigh pros and cons there.
Yeah.
But middle of the road arrows are typically the way to go.
Yeah. If you don't want to go down this rabbit hole and do archery math or watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos, just go with the basic package, because there are kind of, there seem to be kind of evangelists on either side of the heavy arrows or light arrows. And they, in this fun debate and discussion, to make a point, sometimes extreme information gets thrown around, and it kind of can make it seem like if you're not shooting super heavy arrows, you're not making an ethical choice as a bow hunter. That's not true. People shoot lots and lots and lots of deer with these, kind of medium weight, middle of the road arrows. You and myself included, and have had, great success with them for many years. So nothing's really changed there, except I think maybe the discourse around it.
Yeah. And then I have two follow-ups on arrow weight before we put it to bed. One quick and very important thing about going on the extreme side of a heavy arrow, so I'm talking like 550 plus, is you run into issues with, these are people who are purposely trying to build a very heavy arrow, run into issues with arrow spine. So like if you're trying to shoot heavier draw weight to counteract some of the issues you're going to have with trajectory, you need a stiffer spine, but then you're also adding point weight, which is breaking down your spine further, and you need a super stiff arrow to tune. And so that's like a very important thing for people to consider when they're just adding point weight or insert weight to their setups. It's just like, think about what that's going to do to your tune and the headaches you're going to be in for if you did your archery math wrong.
Yes.
And like an example of like when a heavy arrow is a good thing is like my traditional bow setup. I have a 43 pound recurve bow, but my shots are limited to 25 yards and in. My arrows are 680 grains for that setup. They're not 680 grains for penetration purposes. They're that heavy for aiming so that I can have a point on of 25 yards and I can aim with the point of my arrow without having to walk the string at all.
We'll be right back after the break.
Having confidence in your gear is an absolute must in any season. And if you're a deer hunter, you know that some of the best opportunities come during bow season. Bowtech sets the gold standard in anywhere, anytime, tunability, and accuracy. Head over to bowtecharchery.com to see the full lineup.
Before we get even nerdier with that, let's switch topics.
Okay.
How about another sort of controversial one? How about the brand of bow that you shoot? Does that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. It's really interesting the way that the compound bow landscape has changed in the last 3 years, really. We've seen bow companies diverge from their historic identities. So, for example, like this past year, Matthews came out with the lift, and it is a different Matthews bow than previous Matthews bows. So, for example, my favorite Matthews of all time, the Traverse. Amazing bow. So smooth to shoot, no hand shock, just like a true pleasure. But that is quintessential Matthews to me.
Right.
The lift is like a little bit more of an aggressive draw cycle to it and a little bit of a less forgiving valley. So if you're going into that bow and you're thinking Matthews, I know what this is going to be like, you're going to be surprised.
Yeah.
And then, on the flip side, you have PSE, who was kind of known for more aggressive speed bows for a long time. Their new bows are super smooth to draw, easy to hold, and very, very little hand shock. So you kind of have them like flipping things. And if you go into buying a bow without an open mind, you might get a bow that you're not super happy with. I know a lot of Matthews fans ordered the lift sight unseen, and
we're a little surprised.
Yeah.
Can I make a bit of a counterpoint here? And I'm stealing this from PJ Riley from Lancaster Archery, who we do our compound bow test with. I think for most bow hunters who haven't been shooting all of the new bows kind of head to head and evaluating the real fine details between them, I think whatever modern compound bow they get, if they shoot it a lot and it fits them and is tuned properly, if they shoot it a lot, they're going to get used to it. And then that's going to become the thing that they like. So I almost think that it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You throw down this money on a bow and then you start shooting it and then you get good with it and your shooting style and tastes kind of become attached to that specific bow. And as you build confidence, you're like, oh, this is the bow. This thing is the best. So all of the bows that we test, all the bows that we've tested in the last 3 years, both PJ and myself and you, we're like, we would happily hunt with any of these bows. They're all pretty good. They're all plenty accurate. A lot of them have kind of similar trade-offs. Some are a little lighter, some are a little faster, some are a little slower, but have, less vibration. But overall, all these bows are pretty great. And if you pick one and then shoot it a ton and get good with it, you're going to believe that that is the best bow. And I think whenever we kind of choose a best bow for our testing or do a review, we always get blowback from, fans, real fans of the other bow companies. And I think that's the reason. I think it's just because they have a bow that they love and they can't imagine that another bow brand could be better than their beloved bow that they have at home.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% spot on. There are some exceptions. There are some stinker flagships, but for the most part, yeah, they're all really good, especially from all the, the big brands that we know.
Yeah. How about, this one I'll let you nerd out on, tuning. This is something that you've coached me up on a bit over the years and have, made more clear the importance of tuning. So let's start with the real basic stuff. Like before I go hunting, what do I need to make sure is checked off in terms of tuning?
All right. So it depends on what type of broadhead and how much fletching you have on the back of your arrow.
Okay.
So let's say you're someone who wants to have like the really cool 4-fletch, low profile vanes and shoot an iron will wide cut broadhead.
Yeah. So fixed blade.
You better have your stuff together in terms of tuning for that, whole setup to shoot well.
Okay.
So that person, probably should go beyond just a basic vapor tune. And there are a lot of different ways to tune a bow. For me, I've never had a bow that didn't shoot a bare shaft that wouldn't shoot a broadhead. So I still rely on bare shaft tuning. I know it drives people absolutely crazy, but like if you are shooting that type of setup, that's one thing to look into. Or you can just do like, screw broadheads onto arrows and do a broadhead tune, which is a great way to have to refletch arrows, but that's fine. If you're super into archery, just another fun project to do. On the flip side, if you're shooting like a sever and you're shooting like in a hybrid, yeah, just a basic bullet hole and you're good to go.
So, okay, speak English now. Sever is a mechanical broadhead, expandable broadhead. And
AAE hybrid is a parabolic, it's like 2.7 inch.
Small vein. Small.
So just like, it looks like a classic. Well, it's not small really, like by today's standards. It's like, a normal size, like it's like what I would recommend for people who are whitetail hunters because it's quiet. It's going to have a lot of recovery, especially if you fletch it with a helical. So it's just a good all around broadhead steering vane. So like, that's like a very forgiving setup, like mechanical with like a pretty big vane on the back. There you go. You're done.
So you just
shoot that to a bolt hole.
Yeah. And when you say shoot it to a bullet hole, you're just talking about shooting it through paper. And as long as you're not getting some weird tear through the paper, then you're good. You're good to hunt.
Yeah. Still shoot your broadheads though. Like don't just shoot a bolt hole and be like, all right, you said I'm good to go. shoot the broadheads. Make sure like they have practice mode on most mechanicals. So just double check. But yeah, you should be fine. So again, it's just like if you're flying in the margins, things become more critical. And that's when you just need to be, have more time to spend tuning.
I think one other tip here is you really do have to do this yourself. Like you can't just take your bow to a bow shop and say, hey, tune this for me. And then just believe that it will be in tune. Because just like any other shop in America, whether we're talking about, automotive or a barber shop, not all of them are created equal. And you can't just trust this to someone else. You gotta do it yourself.
Yeah. And especially if they're shooting the bow, the way they interact with your bow, their grip pressure, all that is going to be different than yours. So the tune is going to come out a little bit different. Yeah. You had this experience this year, so maybe you want to share that story.
Yeah. I got new strings put on a bow and, had the arrow set up that I was going to hunt with and asked the local shop, who's been great, had them paper tune it and like paid for the paper tuning too. And then, got home and started shooting and everything seemed fine at first. And then I started shooting from a little bit farther away, it was maybe at like 40 or 50 yards. And I could see odd arrow flight, watching the arrow kind of go down range. I could see that the fletchings were kind of kicking out to the side at some point downrange. And when you see stuff like that, something is wrong. Or if your arrows are hitting the target at like really odd angles inconsistently, like something is going on here, right? So then I quickly shot it through paper and for how I was shooting the bow, it was not tuned properly. I was getting, pretty noticeable left tears through the paper. So if I hadn't kind of known a little bit about what arrow flight should kind of look like and known the very basics of paper tuning, I might have just kept shooting because the arrows, for the most part, they're hitting where I was aiming. But maybe, Scott, you should explain the problems if your bow is not tuned properly. Even if you are hitting where you're aiming most of the time, you're still going to have problems in a hunting situation. So explain why you need to do this.
Oh, yeah. Well, forgiveness is a real thing. So a bow that is not tuned will be harder to shoot accurately. And that's like kind of the mythical dragon that a lot of people chase is more forgiveness, is why people fall down the rabbit hole of tuning their bows. Like there are a million ways to arrive at the same conclusion in terms of tuning. So there's a lot of cool ways to do it, but basically you want a bow that is going to shoot right where you're aiming, give you good arrow flight, and make it so that your small mistakes aren't so bad. It's not going to make up for like really bad mistakes, but like small, like, a little bit of different grip pressure, like there are ways to torque tune a bow. So even if you do torque the grip a little bit, like you're a little bit tense, it's not going to affect the shot that much. Probably the biggest things for hunters, though, if your arrow flight isn't good, you have a better chance of snagging a branch as your arrow flies sideways to the target, and your penetration is not going to be what it would have been if you had clean arrow flight. Like, if you try to stab something with a knife at an angle, it's not going to go so well. But if you, put the handle right behind the point and push, it's going to go in really easily. The same concept with arrow flight. You want that thing flying straight, knock behind the point, and you'll have much better penetration. Speaking of like things that really, really matter, contact. So if you're running like high profile vein, or your drop away rest isn't timed properly, you're getting some type of fletching contact, that will cause all kinds of issues in terms of consistency in your arrow flight, but also you won't be able to properly tune the bow with your arrows like that. So that's usually the first thing I look for when someone's having trouble with tune, is making sure that there's no contact anywhere in the system. It can also be an issue if you have some type of like form hindrance. And so like if you're putting a lot of string pressure on your face. And so what that does is, one, it's inconsistent usually. So like the string is like really pushed up against the side of your face. You're getting a lot of contact there. String's going to come off of that and oscillate differently every time. So tuning is going to be a nightmare in that scenario. Same thing with like your grip pressure. If, you're torquing the bow a little bit every time, paper tuning, even just like a basic paper tune, can be really difficult. So just pay attention to those things as you start going down and tuning your bow.
And just to, to stress the importance of this, all the debate and all the kind of interest over broadhead selection and arrow weight and bow speed and all of that stuff, that is mostly targeted toward getting the best penetration possible. People really care about that. All of those other factors don't really matter that much if your arrow isn't flying straight at the target. Like, you can do so much more detriment if your arrow isn't flying straight in terms of penetration than you can by changing up any of these, better broadheads, sharper broadheads, heavier arrows. All that stuff kind of goes out the window if your arrow is flying at an angle toward the target.
Absolutely. I think that kind of goes to the larger point of this, of like what really matters for bow hunting, is it's the basics matter. So like you have to, from the beginning, have to have like decent archery form. So your arrows will hit where you're aiming, because that is the most important thing. And then that'll make tuning easier, and you'll have straight arrow flight. And if you just have, a good sharp broadhead, medium weight arrow, you're going to have a lot of success. And then everything else that you want to experiment with will just be gaining slight advantages going forward. It's just like how all the really, even the budget compound bows, like in that like $500, $600 range, are all really good. All the broadheads I've tested for the most part have been good enough for hunting. Like, yeah, there are some that are better than others, but most of them are pretty good. Same thing with like arrows, like a lot of this stuff. If you're just like sensible about the products you choose, you're going to be good. And then like upgrades only will enhance your experience going forward.
Can I add one last thing that matters?
Sure.
Confidence. Just got to believe. You just have to believe in yourself and feel confident when you're drawing back that you're going to make a good shot. And at this point in the game, there are only a few ways to kind of instill confidence or add more confidence. One is what you talked about: shoot a bunch. Kind of cram before the test. Make sure that you're shooting good. Like the day before you go hunting, I like to shoot and be like, "Oh yeah, I got it." And I like to end my practice round with a perfect shot. And then the other one is, folks might like to hear this, but reduce your range. Decrease your range in a hunting scenario. If you've been practicing at 60, great. If you're practicing at 80, great. But for shooting whitetails, like keep it to 40 yards and in, and you'll feel very confident after practicing all summer shooting at 80. You'll feel very confident when you go to draw back on a deer at 20 yards. So I'm a big believer in confidence and momentum So try to get that right before the season.
Absolutely. Like Joel Turner always talks about how you can't shoot with hope. There can't be a factor in archery.
Yeah.
No one's like, I hope I hit this deer. That's not going to work. Like, this thing is going to die. I know exactly what to do, and things will start falling down for you.
All right, Scott. Well, thank you for this. Thank you for this pep talk. I've got to start driving, but yeah, I appreciate it.
I'll try not to be jealous while you're out there hunting mule deer and I'm stuck in the office.
Okay. Yeah. Get back to work. You got more archery articles to write. So.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited by Mike Pedersen of 85 Audio. It's hosted by our editor-in-chief, Alex Robinson, and is produced by me, executive editor Natalie Krebs. You can read more from Scott at outdoorlife.com/archery gear. That's outdoorlife.com/archery gear. Music in this episode is composed and performed by Pierre Locatelli via APM Music.